Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our conference, EB5 Investment, Unique Opportunities and Challenges, and to Baruch College. We are delighted to present this conference in association with Mona Shah and Associates, and I would particularly like to thank Mona for her guidance and enthusiasm in enriching the content of today's program. Also, I would like to extend my special thanks for the sponsors. This conference brings together the industry leaders who will discuss the current state of EB5 program and the opportunities it offers for the developers and investors. In this conference, we will particularly focus on the challenges and opportunities that the EB5 program presents for the New York real estate market. Today, we will have 6 related panels with outstanding panelists. It's going to be a very busy day. The first panel will be on the future of EB5 and what can we expect. In 2015, the top 4 countries for EB5 based on I-526 petition issued were China, Vietnam, Taiwan, and South Korea in order. The second panel, therefore, will focus on China and the rest of the world, what the brokers, investors, and agents care about. Remember that the brokers like to have an access to low cost of financing, and it turns out to be the cost of financing through EB5 is much less than the traditional funding, which makes it alternative financing tool. Therefore, in the remaining of 4 panels, we will discuss effectiveness, real-world experience, and unique issues raising EB5 capital. I strongly believe that by the end of the day, we will have a better understanding of the EB5 program. I am hopeful that the outcome of this conference will be highly beneficial to the real estate industry and to all of you in this room. The Nieman Institute is pleased to host today's conference as we find this to be an excellent opportunity for the industry professionals, academia, and representatives from our student body to engage in a dialogue. The conference that we host are really one component of the value proposition of Baruch College. Baruch is not just about providing education. It is also connecting our students with the various industries that operate in New York. The real estate program amongst one of prized programs at Baruch. Our programs that we are offering in the Real Estate Institute and Real Estate Department is in all 4 levels: continuing education and certificates, BBA, MS and MBA are rigorous and robust, which provide students with the right knowledge and tools so that they can engage as global professionals in real estate world. Also, I would like to highlight the Nieman Institute promotes third-party research and scholarly research particularly, and publication, which explore the topics of interest to the industry and academia. Our faculty are excellent scholars. Our alumni are absolutely devoted to the success of those who follow them. Without our industry support, the Stephen L. Nieman Real Estate Institute would not be the vibrant center that it is today. Thus, I thank you for your support, shared belief in our mission, and I urge you to continue to be our partners. Without the support of many in this room, this conference would not have been possible. I would like to thank for the speakers who took time to come to share their expertise with us, and I want to extend my personal thank you to Mona Shah and her staff for organizing this conference. I would not conclude without thanking our staff at the Nieman Institute. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you being here today. And now, please join me welcoming to the stage for our speakers for the first panel, and moderated by Mona Shah.
Thank you, Yildiz. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for being here today. We appreciate it a lot. We appreciate your support for Baruch College and the Stephen Newman. Yildiz, thank you. And we hope throughout this conference that we do highlight what a wonderful school this is and the opportunities it presents for local students and overseas students. We have a lot of overseas guests here. and agents and people who are involved in the student side of things, as well as EB5. And of course, EB5 is the big topic in many countries, including China. There's going to be a lot of changes in the EB5 program. They were supposed to come into effect last year. They didn't happen. What do we see moving forward? Do we see them coming this year? We have a wonderful panel. We are waiting for Governor Patterson, who I have just heard he's on his way up the stairs. But I'd like to welcome Ira Kuzman. Welcome, Ira. Peter Joseph from IUSA. Welcome, Peter. And Nima Karopova from David Herson and Partners. Welcome, Nima. We're really honored at the quality of the guests that we have in this program. And we hope, we're actually quite confident that you are all going to appreciate a lot of what's being said. I'm just wondering whether we should actually just get started for a moment. Well, that gives us an unfair advantage, Ilde, because we'll have 5 more minutes more than every other panel, but I think we can use it up. So I will actually get started, and traditionally, whenever we start anything, Peter has been the person who opens up all of our conferences because he knows what's going on the Hill, and that's what you all want to know. You want to know what's going up there in Congress. Is there going to be a change? Is there not going to be a change? How much movement is there? What is the situation? So, Peter, I'm going to begin by giving you an opportunity.
Sure. Well, let's see. Can you guys hear me out there? That sounds like it's on. Sounds like it's on. So, first of all, Mona, thank you for having me here, and thank you to Baruch College, and welcome to everyone here. It's a nice full room on a rainy, what is it, Thursday, right? Rainy Thursday morning, and that often makes people not get out of bed and off to important meetings like this. Well, so what's going on in Capitol Hill with EB5? So IIUSA is invested in the USA. We're the National Trade Association membership base for the EB5 Regional Center program. We're based in Washington, D.C., and I do plead guilty in spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill working on EB5 issues, along with a lot of EB5 stakeholders in the last couple of years. And you might have heard there's an election that is supposed to occur in a couple of months here, and as that picks up, things are certainly changing in Washington in terms of attention span and timing of things. And so just to kind of start from maybe the lowest common denominator, so the EB5 Regional Center Program was created in 1992.
Sorry, Peter.
No, of course.
To welcome the Governor.
Governor, welcome.
It's New York. We're all excused.
Well, it's as I was telling you, Mona, I mean, I basically swam over here from the train stop that I got off, so I can appreciate it. It may take a little longer to get around New York today. So in 1992, Congress created the EB5 Regional Center Program. So this program's been around for well over 20 years. It's gone through many different iterations, and really it's grown up in post-recession capital markets, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. And so, as you might imagine, that has brought a lot of bipartisan, bicameral support as projects have come to life in districts and states all across the country. At the same time, there have been, as we tend to have when programs grow, to the tune of 1,200+% from 2008 until this last fiscal year. So that was $300 million that came in approximately in 2008 through the EB5 program.
But Peter, sorry to interrupt. How much, for anybody who's not aware, how much has been brought in by the EB5 program to date?
Yeah. So the numbers that we like to use, 2005 to 2015, over $15 billion. But
wow.
14 billion of that came after 2008. So it's really remarkable. And $1 billion a quarter last fiscal year, you can see why there's a lot of support, but also a lot of interest in reform to address issues that come with growing pains, issues that come with projects that inevitably don't come to fruition for all sorts of reasons, ranging from fraud to the business plan just didn't work. But then there are real people that get affected when things like that happen, and media reports, et cetera. affect how things work on Capitol Hill. That all said, EB5 continues to enjoy bipartisan support, and really the bigger dynamics that are playing out is there's a bit of an argument as to how incentives for investments should be exactly dialed in. And as I like to say, I remember, I've been involved in EB5 since 2007. I remember when we used to have to fight off other programs trying to take our unused visas every year. And now there's more of a discussion around how do we get money where investment is needed. And so we got to get this program reauthorized by September 30th. It's going to be part of the appropriations process, which in an election year will likely be short term. But it doesn't stop what needs to continue to happen, which is getting consensus among diverse stakeholders. And Mona's been tireless in her participation in our public policy committee meetings. Hopefully she's going to forgive me for how much time she's spent on the phone in the last couple of years eventually. But I'm not counting on that, Mona, because it's been a lot of hours. We need to be prepared for whenever this political moment returns where reform is possible, where long-term reauthorization is possible. And in an election year, that's a bit of an elusive political moment, but we have to prepare in case it shows up maybe in the lame duck session, or maybe lightning strikes and before. Not likely, but long story short, a lot of progress on building consensus among diverse stakeholders. As that process comes to a conclusion, this summer is going to be very, very busy for everyone working on EB5 advocacy to not take anything for granted with Congress that has a lot on its plate every time they wake up the morning after Labor Day in September and usually have to pass an appropriations bill to fund the entire government and what have you. So we think we'll likely have to fight for a short-term reauthorization on a short-term funding package and be prepared for when this political moment for longer-term action is possible with the right amount of consensus.
Peter, the question that is on everybody's lips right now is they probably understand there may be another short-term extension. Will there be an increase in the capital investment amount? Will there be other... what have you heard on what's going on the Hill?
Yeah, so, I think the general idea of raising the minimum investment amounts, which right now are at $500,000 for investments in a targeted employment area and $1 million for investments outside of that, and that hasn't changed since the program was initially authorized in 1990, and that's the Direct EB5 program, and I'll let the lawyers tell you all about Direct and Regional Center EB5. This is an issue that generally has, I think, been settled that it will go up. How much, what the difference will be, that's really where there's more discussion. But even if it's not congressionally, there's slow-moving action for regulatory reform at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that includes this issue that they do have statutory authority to raise. So whether we get it from Congress or maybe a little slower from USCIS, I think it's coming.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. Welcome, Governor Patterson.
Thank you.
And you have been instrumental, I know, in the EB5 program. New York was a little late in starting off from the rest of the country, but it caught up pretty quickly. And you were governor at the time when the first regional center came up. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about the EB5 program, how it started, and where you see things going today?
Well, in the fourth quarter of 2007, we became aware in New York that the taxes we collected were 14% of the taxes we collected from the 40th largest corporations and banks, which is the measure we use for taxation in the fourth quarter of 2006. So $531 million suddenly became $72 million. And across the board, by 2008, in June, for instance, we had collected in the previous June of 2007, $173 million from the 16 largest banks, and that number fell to $5 million in 2008. So in other words, basically, economically, the state was going off the cliff. And the reason New York State was going off the cliff even more than the rest of the country is because 22.5% of our revenues were derived from Wall Street profits, the next largest state being New Jersey at 9%. So it created a $21.1 billion deficit between 2008 and 2009, which was 4 times the original projected deficit, and that is the highest escalation of a budget deficit experienced by a state in 1 year in the history of this country. And guess who showed up just in time to try to manage all of that? So we were looking for alternative ways to try to create production. The employment rate in construction in 2008 in the summer of New York was 35%. The employment rate usually for construction in the summer is 100%. So that was around the time I was introduced to the EB5 program. And apparently the previous 2 administrations before me were hesitant about the program because there was some issues relating to the targeted employment areas, relating to the way the investors were being treated, and just the whole USCIS process. And we wrote a letter to Washington in April of 2008 to the USCIS asking them for an explanation of what the regulations were, and that created an agreement that we signed, I believe in June 2008, that was replicated in 40 other states. So the EB5 programs, as Mona said, that were kind of latent to New York, immediately sprang up.
We caught up quickly, though, right?
And as was said earlier, the increase in EB5 was logarithmic. It was an incredible increase in the resources and the programs. And I think what you're seeing in Washington is a governmental reaction to that, where justifiably and understandably, people from other states, people from rural areas, people from suburban areas want to have the same types of projects, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that. And I think this will all get worked out, but I would not see a solution, just from my vantage point, until after the election. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, Peter, you agree with that?
Now, when the election's going to be held, that could also change. It's like that kind of an era.
Governor, we're counting on you for that one. Yeah.
Well, saying that, even if you don't see a change in that way, I think, Ira, you do see some changes coming forward with or without Congress doing very much, or with or without the elections happening, correct?
Yes. Well, I'm kind of the person they put on these panels because I'm all gloom and doom. We do about 95% of the litigation in the U.S. on EB5, so we see a lot of the problems that occur in the program, and I've been doing this really since the mid-90s, and EB5, as I'm sure Peter will tell you, has gone in cycles. In the mid-90s, we had something very similar to some of the problems we're having now. The response then was the USCIS, then INS, before we had USCIS, was to clamp down, and they did that by issuing 4 separate opinions that are very well known in this area, to make it much more difficult with respect to how an investor can put money into a project. In the old days, as we say, people used to put in $100,000 and take back a note for $400,000 and so forth. And basically, immigration didn't like that. Now everyone has to put in the full cash amount, and they've actually even made it much more difficult in certain other respects with how you can get your money back at the end of the project and so forth. That resulted in not only these 4 decisions, but it also resulted in a series of cases that went on in the 1990s. And there was kind of a boom period before this, and then EB5, EB5 kind of fell off the cliff until, as Governor Patterson has pointed out, 2008 came around and we had a liquidity problem. And I think that, in combination with a lot of investors, particularly from China, resulted in what is now a boom project. In my view, at least, having taken the long view of all this, I think the project, in many respects, is very healthy. But the government is concerned about several things. And in my view, and I think everyone on this panel has probably heard me say this over and over again, but it's no mistake that they brought in Mr. Carlucci to be the head of the program, who had no background in immigration. His background was in money laundering and in financial transactions. And I think that's because the government is genuinely concerned about national security issues. They're genuinely concerned about money laundering. And, we see that now even more and more about how they look at the source of investment. They are doing things at a level that I have never seen before, tracing, where people got their money and how they got their money. So they're looking at that, and they will continue, I believe, to look at that and scrutinize where people are getting the money. And, part of the proposed legislation will make it even more difficult by saying, in effect, if you take a loan, it has to be only your own assets. We're litigating that issue right now because the agency just kind of made it up and said, if you take a loan, the loan must be backed only by your own assets. So you couldn't use your children's assets, you couldn't use a friend's assets as collateral on a loan. I think, we have a good shot at winning that case. Because they just made it up. But the legislation that's proposed is legislation that I think is that part of the legislation. I don't know, Peter, you may disagree, but I think that part of the legislation is likely to go through in one form or another.
Peter, do you think so? Do you think the integrity measures are going to go through in the next few months?
I mean, in the next few months. So I think integrity-related provisions that have to do with source of funds and path of funds are deeply impacted by our post-Panama Papers world, where there's just a lot more scrutiny and a lot more policies around this kind of activity of moving capital across national borders. I'm not sure exactly what bill is going to pass. Whatever does pass, I think integrity-focused is where there is the most natural consensus, and also where there has actually been some explicit request from federal agency for particular authorities to enhance their ability to take action on against criminals or threats to national security, et cetera. Things like that, I think, are at the top of the list for the legislators. And the source of funds specifics, I think it will be hard to argue on those points given this new reality.
Well, with respect, there's a lot of things in source of funds which have been allowed to come through previously. I think, Nima, you would agree with me that 3, 4, 5 years ago, a lot of cases got through which we could not get through today. The scrutiny on source of funds for individual investors has changed tremendously.
Certainly, and quickly I'll say it's a pleasure to be here today. The panelists to my right are all pillars in the industry, which is incredibly frustrating because I'm older than Peter. But certainly when you look at where the program started, right, when it came to its height in 2007, 2008, what we could get through in source of funds, pretty limited. As we've moved forward, EB5 and source of funds has been a cottage industry in some countries, and they've become really good at documenting the process. But what USCIS fails to understand in their evolution is the whole world is not on a Western banking system, right? Mm-hmm. Most of us can walk into a bank and request bank statements for the last 4 years, 5 years, not an issue. Well, in a lot of countries, people don't use banks, right? My family is Iranian. For the most part, they do not trust the government. They do not trust the banks. And you see source of funds where it's, this money's been in my house as cash for 5 years. Well, how do I explain that, right? And then you also have currency restrictions, right? So, China has a 50,000 USD, Bangladesh has 0, Vietnam has 0. And for the most part, to get money out of these countries, you use black market tactics, for lack of a better word. You use a third party that has USD in another country, or you use a transfer house that works with an unrelated transfer house in another country that manages money coming in and money coming out. And USCIS says, well, if you're not using the same company point to point, right? It's not Wells Fargo, Bangladesh, Wells Fargo, New York. How can we prove that's the same money? So based on that, we're not going to approve you. And when you apply that logic, sure. I mean, then nobody, right? Then nobody outside of a Western country could ever apply to this program. But, you know, that's an inherent disservice to an organization that is based on immigration, right? By bringing high net worth individuals and, you know, talented children to come study in the country.
Yes. Sorry.
I was just going to follow up on the second part of this, which has to do with the SEC.
I was about to ask you about that.
Obviously, many people have heard about what's gone on in this industry. And, and I think actually there are great opportunities there, and I'll tell you why. The SEC really wasn't involved in this program, I think, until the last 5 years. And then they took an interest, and now they're taking a real interest in the program. There are three major fraud cases that they're pursuing, but there are lots of others. One is Path America in Seattle, the other is J. Peak in Florida, and the third is Pacific Proton Center, I think it's in Los Angeles. And I think, you know, they have decided that these are security issues, they're fraud issues, that they're covered by the 1934 and 1937 Acts, and they are aggressively going after people who commit fraud, as I think all of us would agree they should. The interesting thing about this is it really also allows opportunities for kind of white knights to come in and take over some of these programs, and we're doing that right now with the Path America program, where someone's come in and said, we want to save not only the project, but we also want to save the investors. And that's a very different kind of situation than you normally have with the SEC. The SEC normally comes in, they appoint a receiver, the court appoints a receiver, and the receiver's job is simply to marshal the assets, period, and to try and distribute as much money that's left to each of the individual investors. Well, now they're confronted with a very different situation, which is investors saying, you know, I'm as interested in getting my residency as I am in getting the money back. I'd like to get the money back, but I really would like to keep my green card or to get my green card. So one of the things that we've been doing, and I think is a real area of opportunity for both lawyers and investors, is how you can manage both of those things. And so, for example, with Path America, we're working with a company that's come in and said, we will make up the difference of the money that's been stolen, in effect, but we also want to work with the current receiver, and when we take over the project, to also work with how we can save the individual investors and keep their green card. Because what immigration normally does is come in and they terminate the regional center. And once the regional center is terminated, all the applications under the regulations are terminated. So we're in the process of working with the former lawyer who's been representing the receiver to appeal that. That is to fight the termination of the program, to say there's somebody to come in to substitute for and run the regional center in a responsible way, and to keep the to ensure that the individual investors will be able to maintain their green card. And so, you know, for those of you involved in these kinds of projects, you may want to think about it in a global way, because I really think there are going to be a lot more of these.
Well, I think we're all going to be in agreement that increased securities is a good thing, because it certainly gives investor confidence. Governor, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes, in the sense that where there have been breaches, that they get identified. But I think what's happening to the EB5 program, and it's happening to a number of other industries, is that vector forces coming from outside are affecting them. And these programs did not ignite the type of problem that unfortunately we're sharing with other industries. So for instance, the Insider Trading Act of 1988, the Money Laundering Act of 1988, the National Securities Market Improvement Act of 1996, they all set up these protections in terms of just the transfer of securities. And then what happened is there were these two conferences, Basel I and Basel II, international conferences, that really came to the conclusion that banks have to participate and can't fritter away the money of their clients in reckless schemes. And that was an understanding. And the breach didn't come as much from the banks as it came from the fact that the regulators, from the control of the currency, the Treasury Department, and the other investigating agencies really did not hold these financial institutions to the standards that the United States had agreed to. So that being the case, there became a real, obviously the tremendous situation where in a year and a half, almost all of the country lost 20% of its wealth. You now have a reaction to that where the agencies who were embarrassed by this are now doubling down on any type of situation. So here comes EB5 that increases, just as all of this is happening, by 12 times, right, Peter? Yep. It increases by 12 times. And if you were someone like Ira said, like Mr. Carlucci, and you're running the USCIS and you see this, look at all the ways that it appears that it could be corrupt. You've got immigration, a big issue as to whether it's immigration's policy should be. Then you've got large sums of money, large contributions from people outside the country, who's wiring the money back and forth. Even if no one did anything wrong, it just sounds like something that is tailor-made for breach, particularly coming behind the things that happened before, even though, for the most part, it really hasn't been that way. There are always going to be fraud cases. So I think it's the climate. And my suggestion, which may be a little different than how anyone else feels, is the longer it takes to put in the reforms, the better, because what we really need are for the agency heads, particularly in the investigative area, to be educated about what this program really is and how much it's helped and how much it's actually been an alternative to the lack of liquidity that's existed really for the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, this comment is really for the whole panel here. I think what's happened and what we're all veterans here in the EB5 program, and what we have seen is the handful of projects back in 2008, maybe 25, 30 regional centers when we first got started, to the fact that right now there's about 1,000 projects on the market, 800 plus floating around in China, and a dozen little ones. There's just so much out there that the investor coming in is just totally confused. He doesn't know where to look. But at the same time, and we have this in later panels, it's a fantastic source of income or fantastic source of money for businesses which would not otherwise get off the ground. There has to be a balance. And I think I do agree with the governor that the longer we spend in trying to get the correct reforms in, the better. But at the same time, we want to keep investor confidence, because every few months we are hearing the money's going up, everybody hurry up and file petitions. And there are brokers all over the world who are taking advantage of this. So, Nima, you have a comment.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the talk that we have, definitely on the legislative side, is that, EB5 has a systematic problem, right? That fraud is rampant and people are abusing the program. I actually think one of the biggest problems that stems to abuse is the processing time delays. If you go back to 2008, 2009, when your I-526 would be approved in 3 or 4 months, you can have an escrow that requires approval of the I-526 before release of money. You can have further conditions as a lender that you have to have all your financing in place, right, with a cash call from the bank or an equity cash call. And you can line these things up that'll protect the investors. But as processing times have increased, some cases taking as long as 2 years now, the developer's in a tough position, right? They need the money to move forward and build. The investor is in a tough position because if there's no job creation, they don't get a green card. So now you have early release of funds, right? You have issues with escrow banks not wanting to release the funds absent or outside of their escrow agreement because of their own internal policies, right? So now we as immigration attorneys have to figure out what's the best choice for the investor. And oftentimes I am the least qualified person to answer that question, right? I'm not an SEC attorney. I don't know the internal policies of the bank. USCIS has not given me a definition of a material change. And to Ira's point, we used to think that if there is some sort of investigation, the SEC and USCIS would be lockstep. They would not jeopardize an investor's immigration process. They would not let a child age out and not take the green card. I am very wrong. Oftentimes it would be the SEC urging USCIS to terminate a regional center so they can get to the matter of hand, which is giving money back to the investors.
Nima, I think the problem is here, and we often see this, is that USCIS run too much on regulations and they don't understand the needs of the developers. At the same time, dealing with developers, we know that developers sometimes don't care that everything is, all the I's and the T's are dotted, and they just want their money. So that is the difficult balance, I think.
Yeah. Well, and when we talk about the SEC and their collaboration with USCIS to really bring the securities oversight aspect of this program to life, I mean, the alphabet soup of different agencies and offices that are involved with USCIS to adjudicate petitions is kind of mind-boggling. And you have the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate within DHS that's embedded into the adjudications process. You have the SEC, you have the Office of Foreign Asset Control within the Department of Treasury. You have FinCEN, which is where Mr. Colucci, the current chief of the Investor Program Office at USCIS, his previous job was at FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in the Department of Treasury. And then there's the Department of Labor and their statistics and that go into TEA designations. And I could go on and on for quite a while. You can get a sense of why the system is not really built for predictable processing times, which really ends up kind of throwing the rhythm off to the point where enough messes seem to come up that, well, Ira, I think kind of fall into often your lap to try and figure out how do you unwind the immigration side with the corporate workout side. And we filed a amicus brief in the Path America case and the Chicago Convention Center case exactly on this point. Education about the immigration interests of the investor alongside of the financial interests of the developer, which is going to be inherently tied together because that investor, as Nima said, needs that project to go forward. That money just can't just be held back. If the project doesn't go, then their immigration is threatened too. So you have a little bit of a chicken and the egg kind of thing going on. And every time USCIS hires more people, they're supposed to get up to almost 200 adjudicators by the end of this year. Usually what happens is they hire new people, train new people. The new people maybe have a different interpretation on how something was being done previously. That would get announced in some way, usually what's called a request for evidence. And again, I'm only a civilian, so I'll let the lawyers get into to that alphabet soup. And I just lost my
So,
train of thought.
but anyway, Peter, what cannot be disputed is the popularity of this program. I mean, you started off by saying how $15 billion, that's a lot of money, has been brought in for mainly small businesses, larger businesses coming in, but all private businesses. What do you see moving forward with the introduction of maybe infrastructure projects with the cities? Unfortunately, we couldn't have Frank on the panel today. He did come on our sort of preparatory panels. Something came up at the last minute. But Frank is from Atlantic City, and Atlantic City is one of those cities which need revitalization badly. You know, it was up there in the heyday in the 1920s, Boardwalk Empire, and now they need money. Where do you see legislation going to help cities like that, or actual government projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of interest from different constituencies that are working with Congress, and infrastructure and manufacturing are examples of industry sectors that are highlighted in the Economic Development Administration's national investment priorities. So, once we start sort of talking about incentivizing investment on a national scale, you kind of end up having the same conversation generally. And it's no surprise. We have a crumbling infrastructure, and places like Atlantic City that are really needing something as a sort of baseline of financing that can allow other financing to come in place and hopefully get that virtuous cycle of economic development going again. That's what this program is about. It's regional economic development and understanding how projects that may be within a metropolitan statistical area will have an effect that ripples through an entire defined geography. And infrastructure, I think, will continue to be a focus of some constituencies, whether it ends up being a specific category for TEA or there are other ways to incentivize it. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I don't expect it to go away because it's a real investment need for our country. And this is capital that, and I haven't said this yet. I usually say this at least 5 times when I give a talk. At no cost to the taxpayer. Think about that, billions of dollars, and when coming into the country, and the Congressional Budget Office scores the administration of this program as revenue neutral.
Right, but we're hitting one big problem right now. As we all know, 80% of the people who come into the EB5 program are from China. China now is deadlocked in visas. There's not enough visas for people from mainland China. There have been talks on the Hill, I believe, or at least there's been a lot of work on the IIUSA side about increasing the visa capacity.
So, IIUSA was founded to really try and highlight the economic development aspect of this program. And so immigration can be a tough word sometimes in Washington, and visa numbers in particular, and how our overall immigration system is designed to accommodate for family reunification, aspects of our capital markets, whether it be labor, financial, that are lacking, or refugee and asylum. And visa numbers generally, when you add it all up, there is a lot of pushback on anything that would be net new number of people coming to the country. That's sort of like a third rail of immigration politics. So here we are with a program that is backlogged, over 22,000 investor petitions pending right now, a 8-year approximate wait time for Chinese investors that would invest today. These issues need to be dealt with quickly in order for this program to be viable going forward. And I think there's a lot of support generally for getting more visas to EB5. A lot of creative thinking on how you might recapture unused visas from years past and maybe apply them to EB5. And that's the kind of thinking that allows you to argue we're not talking about net new visas. But to be very frank, getting new visas for any category, reorganizing how visas are allocated, is usually a difficult conversation to have outside of broader immigration reform.
Right.
Yeah, I think one area in that respect, Peter, you probably agree, is we have a program where we allocate 55,000 visas in a lottery. And the one area that there seems to be some consensus is that program has done what it was intended to do in 1990, and that those 55,000 could be shifted. The problem, of course, is, as Peter pointed out, that there's a lot of competition for those visas. There are people who want more family visas. There are people who want more employment visas in other areas. So that's the tricky thing to do in Washington, which is figure out how more visas can be allocated, or how we can utilize the current system. I mean, one of the things that we've been arguing to the administration is not counting visas for family members. In other words, the way the visa system now works is if you apply and you have 3 children, those 3 children also are included in the visa count, so that there are actually far fewer people coming in as investors than one would think, and that's why we have such a big backlog. So we did a presentation on behalf of 4 former general counsels of immigration, and we haven't convinced this administration. Hopefully we'll convince the next one.
Convince me, Ira.
And one other quick point, and I can turn it back to the panel as well. Currently in the Supreme Court, they are debating the merits of President Obama's executive order for modernizing USCIS, which I think was in November of 2014.
Yeah.
And part of that, DAPA and DACA was really what that was about. But part of that was this idea of parole. And what parole says is if you've done everything required of you for your green card, but it's not issued to you because of a backlog, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you an employment authorization document and a visa document. Come to the U.S., right? Work, go to school, start your life. And whenever your number becomes current, we'll mail you that green card. And at the time, it wasn't a significant impact for EB5. It was more EB2 and EB3. But now with the backlog we have, and hopefully the Supreme Court decides in favor, it doesn't eliminate the wait time, but it really eliminates the stress that is impacting the EB5 market.
Right. That's a good point, Nima, and it moves on to the next issue here. That outside of China, there's been a considerable amount of interest coming into the EB5 program, and the future of EB5, I think, is outside of China as well as China, of course. And I know you travel around the way we do. We just came back from the UAE and Moscow and London and stuff. And what are you seeing as far as an increased interest in countries outside of China?
Yeah, definitely a significant interest. Vietnam has upticked the visa numbers significantly.
Yeah.
India has taken an uptick in visa numbers. Certainly the expats in the UAE that, become well established and earn their money. And as you go to different countries, they have different interests. In India, most of the money seems to be in Gujarat, and
Right.
the Gujaratis are very entrepreneurial, and they, along with their friends or family members, want to come and start their own business. Very little interest in them having a third-party passive investment.
Well, I think also with India, the numbers of the EB2 and EB3 is really helping push the numbers
Oh,
in EB5
absolutely.
up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as far as the expats in the UAE, I think the sort of introduction of VAT in Dubai next year is pushing them out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then, there's talks here in the U.S., if Paul Ryan gets to implement at least part of his tax plan, we would do away with worldwide income. Taxation on worldwide income. Sorry.
That
You
would
can
be
still make
huge.
money everywhere else.
But thanks, Sandra. But also we're seeing the beginnings of FATCA, which is the new tax regime that's global, and the U.S. is one of the primary countries involved, where you'll have essentially requirements for declarations of foreign assets in ways that we've never seen before, in a central database with 90 countries participating, where the different information will be reported. So. There are many different motivators, whether it be taxes that are coming online in other countries, et cetera, but also we're competing globally with other immigrant investor programs. And I just want to make sure that's...
Yeah, people don't realize that. They
Yeah.
think, we kind of tend to be a little arrogant and think that it's just about the US, but no, we are competing globally.
Well, Mona, I missed you in Geneva last week, but
We were in Moscow, that's why.
I understand you were busy too. And I was at a conference where there's essentially representatives from every single immigrant investor program around the world, and they make different decisions as to whether to require both investment risk, immigration risk, or both, like we do, and then what is the measurement for success. The U.S. program is the most stringent in what we're asking risk-wise.
But it's also the cheapest,
For now.
way well under the other programs.
Sure. And Mona's you've heard me say this once before. But we also get the secondary benefit, right? These folks move here and they buy houses and cars and they send their kids to school and they pay taxes on the worldwide income, because we haven't seen Congress pass that legislation yet to remove that requirement. So when you think about the deal that the investor is cutting with the country, it is much bigger than $500,000 or $1 million into a new commercial enterprise. It's about people. It's about moving your life over to the United States and everything that comes with it. I like to say our members are in the business of managing people's personal financial wealth and where they're allowed to exist on planet Earth, wrapped into one product.
That's right. I mean, do you remember the early conferences? There would be regional centers and immigration attorneys. And now you have everybody at these conferences. Immigration attorneys are really in the minimum. Okay, so I'm going to give you all a magic wand. And this magic wand is going to allow you to go into Congress and ask the Senate for anything you want, and it's going to be granted. So I'm going to go to each of you and ask you, what would you like Congress to grant with regards to EP5? Nima?
So just not take down ISIS, because that would be my... certainly the visa numbers is the biggest issue, right? When you have when you have a family that has a 17-year-old child and they ask me, can we immigrate together if they're from China, and I have to say no, that's pretty heartbreaking for the family. U.S. is still a country of exceptionalism, and people still want to come here. So, figuring out a solution to the visa number is the number one issue.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Nima here, and just to put a little more to it, I would want them to fix something now creatively, knowing that immigration reform may be elusive in a broader scale for the next little while, depending on how this election goes and what the Congress and administration looks like for the next several years. We need this fixed now, and it's in the national interest to do so. EB5 is less than 1% of the visas that we issue as a country every year. Less than 1%.
Right, that's crazy. All this noise for 1%.
Yeah.
Allowing only principal applicants to count towards the 10,000 or finding unused visas from years past to apply to EB5, this is not going to tip the scales for opening the borders or whatever the potential criticism might be. This is about bringing people into the country that are going to contribute and that are going to create jobs and then become contributing members to society and hopefully help us with our demographic issues and all those things, because we've got a whole generation to pay for, and we need immigration to do it.
Okay. Ira, your magic wand. What would you like?
I agree, although I think one other thing that we should get Congress to focus on is something that we've kind of talked around here, which is how you coordinate these various agencies and how you set very strict time limits on when they have to make decisions. In other words, Congress can say that the agency must adjudicate an application within a 60-day period. Congress has the authority to say if the SEC is interested in an issue and USCIS is interested, they need to coordinate it and they need to have some kind of joint effort to resolve issues, because I think these issues are not going to go away, but I think we need to find a solution where investors get protected, and right now it's kind of a free-for-all.
Governor?
I think the
Just one wish.
We need 3 wishes.
I think the biggest mistake that this administration and 8 others before it made is not updating and renovating the infrastructure of this country over the last 50 years. Now, if you think about it, a lot of the disputes about EB5 were regional. In other words, where's the money going? Why is this place getting so much money? If we had a national infrastructure plan and EB5 was part of it, it would be absolutely perfect, because now, rather than measuring progress against other states, we would be picking what infrastructure projects we think would be right in each of our states, and it would be a lot more egalitarian, and it would actually work to the benefit of the EB5 program and to the benefit of one of the biggest problems we have in this country. And it appeared when President Obama did the stimulus package that he was on the right path, but instead those projects were painting roads and changing signs, and really it was more of it was more commercial than anything else. But when you think of tying the infrastructure repair to Homeland Security issues, which are vital at this point, and the Homeland Security budget will probably quadruple in the next 5 years, trust me on that, then Congress could really use the EB program. I think maybe if Congress starts to realize that we're not doing anything for immigrants, we're not doing anything for developers, we're actually doing something for ourselves and our country. If they would get it from that perspective, I think a lot of these problems could get cleared up in a short period of time.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. I think it's been a wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona.